Hi, I'm Laura,
I'm Deanne.
I'm Philippe.
and welcome to our Lymond book club. We are reading The Disorderly Nights by Dorothy Dunnett, and we are on part 2, chapters 3 and 4. Philippe will lead us through a discussion of these chapters, but before we dive into it, any initial impressions you guys want to share about these two chapters?
There's a lot that happens. There's a lot of sort of sieges and mini battles that end up not really being sieges and mini battles. Like they're kind of over before they even begin until, of course, the very last one. A lot of back and forth between Lymond and Graham Reed Mallet, and sort of their relationship or lack of relationship is starting to develop, and that's interesting. And yeah, some of the sort of depictions of war and like the lives lost weren't very happy to me.
Yeah. I don't know where we're going, which is interesting to me. Like, I don't see where a lot of this is going. That's not a negative comment. That's a positive comment. Like, I'm confused about some characters and I don't know what their motivations are. And so, yeah, so that's good. It's intriguing.
That is definitely good. I'll share my impressions, which is I just love the adventure parts of this story. There's a lot of action, and it's just fun to read. I mean, given also that it's terrible what happens to the people of Gozo, which actually happened, still, the book itself is a fun read.
Yeah.
All right, Philippe, you want to dive in?
Sure. So jumping right into it, the first part of chapter 3 and part 2 is called The Voice of the Prophet. And we check back in with Oona, who we haven't seen since the end of Queen's Play. It sort of goes over what's happened to her between that book and now, where she met the governor of Gozo in Marseille, Galatian de Sicel, and sort of started a tawdry affair with him. And now she's in Gozo watching the Turkish ships get closer. We find out she's pregnant. She thinks it's Cormac's child. I highly doubt that it is. And then sort of at the end of that little bit, the Turkish ships turn to Sicily and everybody in Gozo thinks that they are saved, which for the moment they are, but we know that that's not true.
So I have some comments on this. My first comment is I think Oona did totally the right thing after Queen's Play. She went to try to like have a retreat and recover. It said her, she was soiled and disillusioned, and she went to look for freedom, space, sun, escape, loving wisdom, kindness, friendship, and she was going to stay at a convent, and she was going to like figure out what to do next with her life. And she was starting to like relax and recover from this awful experience, these years with Cormac. And I feel like there was a lot of hope for her future in all that, and then everything went to hell, and it makes me very angry and sad for her.
Yeah. I completely agree with that 100%. Like this little section really, well, these two chapters too, just I really came to like Oona in ways that I just hadn't before. And I think it's just because we got a better sense of her motivations and what she was looking for, and what she was hoping for, and then her hopes were destroyed and all that, but we got to see all that in her. And so I really liked her character in these two chapters and just getting to know her better. And this opening section, where she's on the ship with Galatian, it's just so heartbreaking. Like you just saw him sort of take advantage of this hurting woman over like 2 pages, and it just starts out with her like hoping that, and the quote was like she'd found shelter in this man, that he was going to be a safe place for her to land, was her thought. And then it just, it just reminded me of like somebody grooming like a pedophile grooming a child, which of course isn't what happened. Like, she's an adult with agency, but just this, she was in a super vulnerable place, and he just kind of like touched her very gently, and just it's like he just moved her into this space of rough sex, and it was super creepy.
And her instinct toward him was pity and compassion, because she thought that he was like, this was the first time he was ever doing something like this, and that he was, breaking his vows and feeling guilty. And then it becomes apparent that he's done this a lot, and all of her, like, what she did was out of kindness, but he didn't deserve that kindness.
What is it with the heads of the Knights Hospitaller being such horrible friggin' people? Like, Juan de Homedes is useless. Galatian de Seyssel is even more useless as the governor of Gozo. We see how ineffectual he is. We just see the beginnings of it in this chapter, but it really becomes apparent later on. It's just he's just there because of the power it gives him. He's not taking the responsibility of the office or doing anything to help the people that he's governing.
I wonder if it has something to do with, like, there's a merit structure that gets people so far. Like, if you do a good job, you get to rise like so far in the structure, but it's nepotism that actually gives the top spaces to people. So like the people at the very top are incompetent and only there because of who they know or who they related to. But then it's the people at like the highest level of the sort of functional people that are actually the ones who are really good at their job, maybe.
I think there's definitely some hints of that. And there's also a lot of, like, we see this, just like the sort of corruption at the levels of power with the knights, but we see that also like in the French court. So, skeevy and probably very true.
And like, just how despicable he is. His reaction when he discovers that Oona is pregnant on page 106. He had not risked his soul with the curse, but freeing himself, had rolled from her bed. "You can't blame your Irish bastard on me," he had exclaimed loudly and clearly at her door, and she heard it repeated with open laughter through the house and then the streets of the Citadel.
And it's so,
like, sure, it's not your kid, it can't be your kid, but like, how about treating this woman with some compassion? Like,
yeah. And she's in a really difficult situation. This isn't an age where women have independent power. Maybe, unless they're like at the very top and they're like the widow of a powerful man or something. Like, she's pregnant, she's alone, she doesn't have a man to support her except this guy, so she's stuck trying to keep him on her side by having this unpleasant sex. Now it says that he's not bothering to court her anymore. Like, it's just awful, the situation that she's in.
Do we get any sense that she can leave? Like, or is she almost being held prisoner in a way by him?
Well, where would she go?
Yeah, like that was gonna be my question. She's on an island. Like, how's she gonna get off?
She doesn't know anybody. She has no friends, no support structure.
Especially with the Turkish ships descending, there's really no way. I do like that she sees his ineffectiveness as a leader and like really tries to push the people of Gozo to do things for themselves and like almost become their de facto leader under his stead.
Yeah, she tries to push him to be a leader, just like she did with Cormac. Because that's another thing about the position she's in. She can't act independently, even though she's the most capable person there. She can't be the leader. She has to try to get Galatian to be the leader.
Yeah, the last thing I wrote in my notes for this chapter, or this bit of the chapter, was, will Oona end up governing Gozo? No, is the answer, unfortunately, but I thought I could see it going there.
I had a couple other notes. Did you want to say something, Dee?
No, I was just like, if life was fair, like she would, if life was fair, she wouldn't have to be behind Cormac or behind this guy, or like she could just be the one who does the action, but it's not the world she lives in.
Yeah. So there's also a couple other interesting things. One is that Jarrett Blythe had been kind on Messina. So even though we've seen him be quite contemptuous toward her, apparently he was nice to her when they met.
I wonder if it had something to do with where she says, Jared Blythe, who'd been kind of Messina, and to whom she had talked stupid with son and luxury of Lymond. And I wonder if it's post that discussion where he becomes so contemptuous of her. So like whatever she said about Lymond did that. And then I also thought it was interesting that she says, she mentions Graham Mallet, and she said she thought fleetingly that there was a man she could trust. So she's heard of this guy. And
Well, and Una's not dumb, so the fact that she finds him trustworthy and she's very suspicious is a point in his favor, I suppose.
but has she met him, or has she just heard of him? Because I think she said she'd heard of the quiet man with the beautiful voice and the guinea gold hair, Graham Mallet, and she thought fleetingly that there was a man she could trust. So I don't think she's actually met him yet.
I don't know. Maybe.
At least we don't know if she has.
Yeah. It says she had seen the Grand Master and heard of the quiet man. Maybe she didn't mention that.
Because I think you're right. If she had met and talked to Graham Mallet, like, I think she's pretty savvy in her ability to judge people, at least to some extent, although she sort of had a disaster with Cormac. So, but who knows how that worked out. But
And another one with Galatian, actually.
yeah, that's true. Maybe she's not so good at it. Good point. Yeah.
So also, I think her attitude toward Lymond is interesting. The reason she sends him that note, she's feeling self-loathing, and it bursts into anger. And I think the self-loathing is interesting because there's a lot of similarities between her and Lymond, and that's another one. And she feels like he's coming. She thinks of him as indifferent, coming to inspect the finished transaction. So she doesn't feel like he's coming to rescue her out of, caring for her. She feels like she's just a curiosity to him. And she says, she wanted none of Francis Crawford's cutting rebukes. But also she seems to be afraid that he's going to die because she has this like awful, fear of him. Her protector perished, and then the knights saddled with a loose woman. So she's thinking of herself as this loose woman, and a pregnant loose woman at that. So this is her low self-esteem, but also then her fear of like Lymon would die because of her and she's not worth it, and then she'd be stuck with the knights.
Yeah, like she's this bit about where she says she was going to hell, it seemed her own way, and it's like there's almost this mix of bitterness and self-loathing and despair and pride and like all of that mixed up together in this very unhealthy space that she's in.
She's such an interesting character, such a contradictory combination of traits, but it makes sense for her.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that despair and her lack of confidence sort of is also what makes her assume that the child is automatically Cormac's, because it's like, look at this horrible thing that happened to me in the past. Of course, it would be sort of my punishment to have to bear his child. Like, I don't think she even has a thought that it might be Lyman's, which I think totally.
Of course, we're like, of course it's Lyman's. Like,
why wouldn't it be Lyman's?
Yeah, like that's the only thing that makes sense. When of course it does make sense that maybe the baby's Cormac's as well, but in my mind, definitely Lyman's.
Right.
Remember that we're the readers of the book about Lymond. She's a character in it, so she doesn't have that perspective that we have.
That's true. But I mean, like, even the night after they had sex, like that scene, we were talking about like, oh, something could happen here. So yeah.
So then I think also that like at the end of this section, we have out of a respite from her masochistic self-contempt comes this half mystic certainty, which is what inspires her to be a leader and to try to help people, and to try to get Galatian to step up. And so that's what I feel like also is a similarity with Lymond, is even, despite her self-loathing, she wants to help people and she wants to lead and she steps up in a challenge.
Yeah, she does. I think she's at her core. I think she's really motivated by wanting people to have better lives. Like, I mean, that's what she was trying to do with Cormac, and help the Irish, and she's trying to do that here. Like, I think she's at heart, she's motivated by helping others, and she's just like constrained in all these ways from being able to do that effectively.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Stupid patriarchy, putting all these incompetent men in charge, and then an awesome person like Oona struggles to make a difference.
True.
All right, should we move on to the next section?
So the next little part, there's celebration in Burgu and all over Malta that the ships are turning north towards Sicily. Of course, this makes Juan de Homedes think that he was right all along. And see, I told you they weren't going to attack us. You should have listened to me to begin with. And then sort of that night, there's this boatload of women and children that arrive from Gozo. And Juan de Homedes is woken up and he will not allow entry. He will not allow them entry into Burgu. And the very last thing he says is just sink the boat, which is sort of a terrible thing for a leader of this organization to say.
Also with their whole mission about helping the sick and all of that, and it's just like, how can you justify sinking a boat full of women and children when your whole reason for being is to nurse the sick back to health no matter who they are? And just, it's just mind-boggling.
It's like the ultimate in hypocrisy.
Yeah. Boy. There was a slight moment in this whole section that I underlined and wanted to mention, where Gabriel is talking to the Grandmaster, and the Grandmaster says something pompous about not anchoring God, and Gabriel says with unexpected wry humor, "It was not the deity who seemed to be principally offended." And I just like that, like his wry humor. Yeah.
Why did you?
It just makes him likable, that he's got kind of this slightly sarcastic response. So
It reminds me also a little bit of Jolito. Like they're both so saintly. It would be too much if they weren't like a little bit funny and a little bit edgy. And then he's got his unexpected wry humor, just like she has her slightly dirty songs.
Yeah, it makes him more relatable.
Yeah.
Oh.
Right. And then we jump into the whole reaction scene, right? Do you want to jump to that or anything else to say?
I was just going to say one thing quick. I like on page 109, Homedes. Why not? Why not? We are not fools, gentlemen. And I underlined it and said, they may not be fools, but you are.
Oh, yeah.
So true.
Yeah, if there's nothing else to be said, I'll go into the next part, the reaction scene.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Wanda Homedes is like so many of our corrupt politicians. Like, I just tune them out because they're so hypocritical and stupid, and every word is bullshit, and you just like, it's not even worth listening. So anyway, having read it before, I'm like, I hate this guy. I'm not even listening to him.
Yeah, like I don't want to linger on the idiocy of. Ugh.
We spend so much time in America right now listening about it on the news. I don't want to deal with it in this book. So less said about him, the better, I think.
Yeah, or you want to see him shown up, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
That'd be nice.
So anyway, in the next part, Jarrett Blythe is very angry at Homedes for his reaction. And we find that the French knights really want Gabriel to take the lead and sort of step up. Sorry, my notes are terrible in my handwriting. It turns out that Gran Reed Mallet and a gentleman named La Valette actually ended up going behind Homedes' back and giving aid to the boatload of people from Gozo that night. They did send them away the next day because he makes a point as to why they're better off in Gozo, or so he thinks at the moment, because they assume that Dragut is going to come back and attack Burgu, which he does end up doing. But anyway, I liked Gabriel's reasoning in this chapter for not rebelling against de Homedes, because it shows that he really cares about the order and about doing things the proper way.
Yeah, I was torn during this whole section because it's like all of his reasoning seems completely logical and reasonable. And it's like the reason he helped these women and children and then he sent them back to Gozo, and that seemed reasonable. Like that seems like, okay, it makes sense why. and he doesn't want to take over the order, and like his reasoning makes sense to him there, and it's all reasonable and logical and and yet there's a part of me that was sort of wondering, I'm so conflicted on his motivations. Like, is he motivated by, a selfless desire to serve the order, in which case all of this seems reasonable and logical? Or is he motivated by something else, in which case all of this seems reasonable and logical, but perhaps motivated by something unspoken, which it could go either way. I don't know. So, yeah, but Jarrett seems, I don't know. I'm more and more convinced of his sort of ridiculous dramatics. And
Well, we start with that for the order, shouted Jarrett Blythe, hurling the ripped shreds of his robe of St. John to the floor. So
yeah,
I wonder what made you think Jarrett's a little dramatic.
Like he's just so over the top. It's like he's a teenager who like feels intensely every emotion to the utmost in the moment, and then the next moment he feels a different emotion intensely utmost to the moment, You're just like, whoa. So
entertaining character.
Yeah.
There's a moment at the beginning of this section where Lymond is questioning Gabriel's choices. And I'm not sure if Lymond was doing it to hinder him or help him. Like if he knew in advance, well, of course, this is what he was doing, so I want him to admit it to everybody. Or if Lymond generally was like, something's fishy here.
Yeah, that's kind of what made me a little bit suspicious of Graham's motives, is that Lymon, like that may I ask, said someone peaceably why Sir Graham did not bring us, like you get this kind of calm, just interjected comment from Lymon. And I don't know, it was just like a little drop in the bucket, like, may I ask this, and it just made me wonder, like, does Lymon see something here that I don't see, which I think is probably true. Or like, what is it that I'm not seeing that Lymon is seeing? Maybe that's a better question.
And we could also wonder what Lyman's motivations are. He kind of keeps saying these things that kind of poke at Gabriel and at the knights, and we could wonder if that's because he's suspicious of them, if that's because he's just trying to see their true colors and get them to respond, or it could be something immature in Lymond. Like it could be that Lymond is the one at fault here, and we're being set up to dislike Gabriel because Lymond dislikes him, but actually Lymond could be wrong.
Yeah. What do you think? And Laura, this is going to cause some twistiness on your part since you know what's actually happening, but pretending you didn't know what was happening. Like, what is Lyman's overall goal here? Like, I'm confused about that. Is he ultimately trying to recruit some stellar fighting men to take back to Scotland? In which case it seems odd that he's poking at them here. Is Oona his ultimate goal? In which case, why doesn't he just ditch the guys and go to Gozo? It wouldn't be that hard, What do you think?
I'm wondering if Lymond has some sort of knowledge of Oona's pregnancy already. I wouldn't put him past him somehow have figured that out, and in which case he feels obligated to the child, and that's why he's so like dead bent on finding her. It's a possibility. I don't know so much, but
I think that would be difficult to do because she didn't, like, she's actively hiding it, and she didn't know until recently.
We've seen Lymond know some pretty interesting secrets without any real sort of.
I think that would be difficult to know, but I'm wondering if there's some other motivation that we just don't know about at all, that has nothing to do with Oona and maybe only tangentially to do with Scotland. That's kind of what I'm curious about. Like, is there something else going on here that we don't know about? Because this seems like a rather, I don't know, if recruiting for some future fighting force is his goal here, this seems like a very bizarrely risky and elaborate way to do that.
Well, now that he's here, it's going to be hard to leave. So he could be genuinely trying to help and make a difference because, he's stuck here too. So it would be nice to repel the Turks so they don't all die.
Yeah. Yeah.
He also has this childhood friendship with Jarrett. So maybe he doesn't want to leave Jarrett to die.
Maybe. I don't know.
I do have other thoughts, but I feel that they would be too spoilery to share. Yeah, there's no way I can say it without giving stuff away.
We'll talk about them later.
Stick a pin in it. We'll talk about it later.
Yeah, for sure. I think also we get another description of his neutral blue stare and his detached presence. So we get neutral and detached, but is he really neutral and detached? That's a really interesting question about what's going on with him.
I agree with the question. I don't have an answer to the question, but I agree with the question. Whose perspective are we in here?
Might be Jarrett's.
I mean,
maybe just omniscient.
Just an omniscient narrator, yeah. I mean, or a limited narrator. Yeah, I don't know. Because sometimes I feel like we get really good insight when we know when it's clear which character's perspective we're hearing the story from. But if we don't know which character, or if there's not a particular character that's giving us this particular section of the story, it's really hard to tell. So in this detached, is Lymond really detached, or is that just?
I think he's giving an impression of detachment.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the narrator telling us he's genuinely detached, because we know Lymond presents a version of himself to the world that's not his true self. I mean, that said, he is literally being paid to be there as a neutral observer. So maybe he's playing up that aspect of himself. I think also there's this strong possibility that the Grandmaster could be like, you're the traitor. Something bad happens. It was your fault. So it's important for him not to say anything that could be read as sedition. So he's detached and neutral in this scene where the rest of them are like, Graham, take over.
Yeah, I mean, he even gives that as a reason later for going to Medina, is to get rid of a scapegoat for that.
Yeah. I mean, it could also be Lymond is sticking around because he wants to help people, just like Oona. They're in a situation where a lot of innocent people are going to suffer, and Lymond would like to do what he can to make sure that doesn't happen.
And he could, there's also, this is a little petty, but the whole digging at Gabriel all the time, it could just be because he wants to dig at Gabriel. It could just be that there's a target in front of him and he's just playing with someone.
So. I mean, I think that's the big question of what is Lymond doing? Because we're not getting in his head. And so the way that he's ripping on Gabriel seems pretty immature, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, it just makes me feel which just takes me back to the question of is there something that is going to be revealed later that Lymond knows that we don't know? Or did we miss something, which is completely possible? Did Philippe and I miss a tatty boy level of something earlier in this book?
I'm not going to say anything, but I think that the same things about Gabriel at this point that Lymond knows.
Okay.
I think, I always like finding a mystery in a book, and I think the mystery so far of this book is who the hell is Gabriel, and what is his deal? Are we going to end up liking him? Are we going to end up hating him? I have no clue yet. Because Dee, you said last time, he keeps doing things that are both sort of sneaky and shady, and then also redeeming himself a couple of pages later. So
there's literally a point in this chapter where I got tears in my eyes because of something Gabriel said. Yeah. So it's so
all right. You want to keep going?
The next section is super tiny. I don't think anything else needs to be said about it, except that July 16 and Suleiman's armada is in the Massamusetto Bay. So they have come back and they are going to launch their first attack on Birgu. And I think I looked back at the map of Malta, and I think the Musa Macheto Bay is the one above that little hill that you called La Valletta.
Yeah, I looked at a historical reference to the bay, and it's like it's the other name for it, and then it said traditionally called the name that she uses in the. So it's the other one. Hoi.
There it is.
There it is. So that's the bay that they're in.
Yeah.
And then that's what's a mountain right now. And then this is Birgu over here.
So where's Medina?
I think it's further to the northwest.
There it is. See it there? It's like in the middle.
Oh, okay. Yep, I see it.
They say it's only, what, about 9 miles away, 14 miles away? I forget.
Yeah, it's Malta's pretty small.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense.
And Mount Siberus, I think, is that what La Valletta is as well, or Valletta?
Yep. So this is it's a 52-minute drive from Birgu to Medina, and yeah, Mount Siberus is Valletta.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So war plans happen in the next section. They sort of plan to have this long drawn out battle at where Dragut is landing. Instead of sieging in the castle and doing a siege, they're going to take the fight to them. So there's 2 parties that decide to sort of split up, and they're going to try and harry the Turks from the back. And we find out that Lymond has fought with the Turks before. So I think Gabriel asks him, "Oh, you've never fought the Turks, so you wouldn't really know." And Lymond is like, "I've fought with the Turks, actually. I know them from a different angle that you're coming at." So, which is interesting. I think that gives us another hint that there may be some sort of relationship between him and Dragut.
Yeah, I mean, and it could also indicate why Lymond is ripping on Gabriel a little bit, because Gabriel keeps being like, "I exist to kill Turks," and Lymond's like, "I like some Turks."
Yeah, there's a great part later that we'll get to, the great discussion they sort of have about that, I think, in Medina. So
there were 2 little bits in this section that I really loved, or 3 maybe. But one is Gabriel asks, like, would a soldier's advice offend you? And I just wrote a note like, wouldn't it be so nice, like, if we just ask people if advice is wanted? You today, like, hey, I've got some advice. Do you want it? Like, what a lovely thing to do. And I'm speaking to myself because I often give unwanted advice. And so, like, that's a good thing to do. And then I really liked, so Gabriel is like helping Lymon into his saddle, which is just sort of ridiculous. Like, Lymon doesn't need any help. This is Lymon, who had no need of either the space to think or the help in the saddle, found thoughtfully the courtesy to use both. And it was just this little picture of Lymon, like, he totally doesn't need any of this, but he's like, all right, he's being polite and, letting Gabriel do whatever to do this thing. And
so, I mean, that's a really interesting moment. Why does Gabriel help him into his saddle and give him a moment to think and give him advice? Like, what is motivating Gabriel here?
I thought it felt a little condescending, but it could just be because I'm looking for things to be shady, as opposed to maybe he's just being nice. And I don't know. But like, Lymon is so competent, and I feel like perhaps justifiably so, like, the knights are so trained and they have such this history of like martial tradition. And so I think Gabriel's attitude seems to be like, I'm the competent soldier, and the trained whatever with my 100 pounds of armor, and here's this upstart this young kid upstart Scott who's come in, and so he's being a little, whereas Lymon totally knows what he's doing.
It positions Gabriel as a mentor figure and a caretaking figure and a supportive figure, and also as a superior figure. And maybe he's doing that out of, genuine care. He seems to really like Lymond for some reason.
Yeah. And I like that Lymon sort of lets him do that, even though he definitely doesn't need it. And so.
Also, I love Lymond's rebuttal when Gabriel warns him that the Turks scream, and Lymond says, "I scream too, and louder."
I know. It's like, but thanks for the advice. And also just Lyman's like, and we've talked about this before, but just his uber practicality, and especially when it also comes to fighting in his armor, and like these knights are going to be fighting in this 90-degree heat, and they're going to have quilted leather with plate mail on top of it. Like, it's just utterly ridiculous. And he's going to be nimble and light and able to move around quickly and not overheated.
It's something I never even really thought about armor, like fighting in hot metal in this heat. If that armor touches your skin, it will burn you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, there's a whole thing where the knights are riding out to fight the Turks, and like their worst enemy is they keep getting burned with their own armor.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Like,
it works in Scotland and France. It doesn't work in like
Malta is really hot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually there at this time of year. I was there in July. It's really, really, really hot. I wonder also, Philippe, you mentioned earlier, we were talking about what motivates Gabriel. Is it condescension? Is it care? You mentioned when in that scene with Seville Gagnon at the beginning that it was reading like a seduction. And I also wonder if there's some subtext of that in the way that Gabriel is with Lymond. And if it is a seduction, what is the goal of the seduction? Is it to get him to join the Knights?
I think it's partly that, and I don't know what the other part of it would be. I don't really see it as a seduction yet, but I could see it going there.
I mean, they have explicitly said they want Lymon to join the Knights, but I don't know. It just feels like there's more going on, and part of it is Jarrett's response later, which I have so many questions about. We'll get there later.
I mean, they have to know that if by some miracle Lymon did end up joining the Knights, that he would never follow the vows.
Yeah.
Is. I mean, which I guess most of the Knights don't end up following the vows anyway, so maybe they're not all that important, but I don't know.
Maybe Gabriel believes that Lymond could be inspired by the goodness of himself and Jolita and become, using his great mind and capabilities, become a great hero and leader within the Knights and help them redeem themselves.
Maybe. Speaking of Jolita.
Yeah, speaking of Jolita, we jump back to Boghall Castle where she is, and she sort of has this premonition. And she says, "Oh, I feel like Graham might be in danger. When I felt like this, it used to be Graham." So that's an interesting thing. Is she somewhat prescient about these kinds of things?
Yeah, I was like, is there something mystical going on? Also, it was such this random, like, two paragraphs, these little 2 paragraphs in the middle of the book. They're just like, hey, don't forget about Jolita back in Scotland.
I think Dunnet's trying to show us that Graham and Jolita have this strong connection that we haven't really seen because they've never been in the scene together. So.
Right. And I also like this little bit that Tom is uneasy for Lymond. I just like that little note that, like, yeah, it's like Tom really does like Lymond, even if he gets on his nerves and, drives him a little crazy. Like, I think he does like Lymond, and he's just because he has his news from France, which was recent and specific. So he knows what's probably happening or likely to happen and is a little worried. And
it was funny when you guys said when we met the Dame de Dutons, wait, is this book have psychic, like, supernatural stuff happening?
Right.
And that this thing with Jolita is kind of like, is this supernatural? Like, does she have a psychic connection with her brother, or does she just like,
is it like a twin thing where they can,
yeah, or like, is it just maybe she's heard news or something, or sensed it coming since Tom's nervousness? Like, you don't know for sure, but there's still this like psychic communication. Maybe
She's just being dramatic.
Maybe, but she's right.
Yeah.
So before we move on from that section, there was a bit at the end of the previous that I wanted to mention, which is where they're talking about, Lymon wearing one of the knight's breastplates, and he doesn't want to. And he says, "As for the cross, my habit is to fight for the saltire, which is the flag of Scotland." So he's saying, "I'm not fighting for the knights. What I would fight for is Scotland." And then Gabriel says, "Then St. Andrew and St. John both guard you." St. Andrew being the patron saint of Scotland, and St. John obviously of the knights. So the first time I read it, I had no idea what that was talking about, but then I looked it up and
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I guessed that the saltire was the flag of France because I knew St. Andrew was the patron saint of Scotland, not France, Scotland. And so I figured the saltire, it had to be like the symbol of Scotland or something. I didn't know it was the flag, but
yeah. And the Union Jack in the Union Jack flag, like the saltire is like the one of the.
And that makes sense now earlier because the part 1 of this book was called The Saltire and Supporters, and I didn't know what saltire was then either. So
That's the Scots.
good to know.
Yeah.
So if we're jumping to the next section, it's another small section. De Villegagnon and Lymond are talking with each other, sort of about the church and about what Gabriel's thinking. We find out Gabriel really does think highly of Lymond. And then, of course, Lymond states that he would really like to meet Jolita one day. I wonder if that's ever going to happen.
I think it's also interesting the faith that Nick Upton has in. It's not Villegagnon, is it? It's Nick Upton, right? The faith that.
Yeah, Nick.
Oh, was it Upton and not De Villegagnon?
Yeah.
No, it's Nick Upton.
Yeah, and we get the faith that Nick Upton has in Gabriel. He says, "Nothing on earth can surprise or defeat Gabriel, but he would gladly welcome you. We all should to our church."
Yeah. De Villegagnon's name is Nick too, right? Nicholas de Villegagnon.
Nicholas Drummond. Yeah.
Yes. Is it confusing enough?
Margaret's, now it's Nicholas's.
Well, not for long. One of these Nicks.
No, I was just going to say, we don't have to worry about that confusion for too much longer. Poor Nick Upton.
Yeah.
And Nick Upton is the only English knight that's left, right?
Yeah. So this is the end of the English Knights of Malta, I guess.
So, should we go into the next section? Because that was not much to speak about in that one. So, Upton and Lymond are sort of in the same group, and they lead the charge against the Turks that are coming on shore. And it's effective because the Turks are running back to the ships. But while it's happening, Upton sort of has a jolt and like shifts on his horse. And I initially thought that he had been struck by an arrow or something, but I think it's just heat exhaustion.
Heat stroke. Yeah. I thought the same thing. I thought he'd been shot with an arrow. But yeah, he probably had heart failure from heat stroke. And yeah.
So Lymond sort of takes over the charge. We find out later that night that Nick Upton dies, and he is the only knight, the only death of that entire battle on the side of the knights. So Lymond chastises the knights for their use of this armor and this heat. And then Lymond talks to Jarrett Blythe, and he has to concede that the knights do actually fight well when come down to it. So.
Wait, he doesn't, how does he, he's
not concede, but.
I mean, because he also says the knights killed Nick Upton, not the Turks.
Yeah.
So he's pretty critical of them.
Right. But doesn't he sort of say that I see that you guys do fight well when it comes down to it? Maybe I'm reading that into that a little too much.
Yeah, where are you?
I've got to find it. Let me. Okay. Well, I got that idea.
I think
I thought it was. It's interesting that when it was all over, the Grand Master is sort of singing the praises of the Spanish knights and completely ignores the contribution of Nick and Lymon and the knights who went with him. Just totally silent on on their contribution, which was sad.
Yep, he's a jerk.
Wait, who?
The Grandmaster. He's just a jerk. There's nothing revelatory there.
Yeah, so where I got that idea from, and I could have just read it wrong, is at the very end of the section, the bottom of 121. Jarrett Blythe is talking to Lymond and says, well, and Lymond responds, Crawford of Lymond, Comte de Sevigny, who had respected Nicholas Upton, met the studied nonchalance blankly. For all I know, excellent. So I was reading it as like Nick was asking him, like, well, how do you think we did today? But that's reading.
Oh.
That's
I took that as like ironic because he's like met this studied nonchalance blankly. Crawford, who respected Nicholas Upton, met this studied nonchalance blankly for all I know. Like I saw him as being super sarcastic because the knights, their traditions are what killed Nicholas, and he didn't have to die. Like he was a guy that Lymond respected, and he died for no reason, and Lymond's mad about it.
Yeah, that's how I took it also.
Yeah. Because he says, for the rest, you could scarcely claim yet they were blooded. So in other words, they didn't actually fight.
So I have something to share, which is, let's see if you can see it. Do you see this Sir Nicholas Upton thing?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So this was when I was in, there we go.
Better.
In Birgu, and walking around, and there's a plaque to Sir Nicholas Upton. And
he was governor of the city.
Yeah, she sort of doesn't really explain that part, but
yeah.
I would like to know what a turcopilier is.
Yeah, me too. I keep like, I'm like, what is that? I never looked that up.
Yeah.
But I don't want to Google because spoilers.
Right. Who knows what it is?
But you never know.
Yeah.
I think also notable is this whole thing is they're giving the illusion of charging as Lymond and Nick come up with this idea to like pretend they're going to charge the Turks, but they're never actually going to. So it's another one of those tricky things that
yeah, I love the quote, the lunacy of this notion was plain. Like this is just a theme throughout, like we're just going to do this utterly ridiculous thing and maybe it'll work and maybe it won't, and so far it's working. I feel like at some point it's not going to work. Like it's worked so far, but
may not work forever.
It may not work forever. Yeah.
Okay, so a turcopilier is a title given to a senior officer in the Knights Templars and the Order of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem, who is in charge of the Turcopoles. And the Turcopoles were locally recruited mounted archers and light cavalry employed by the Byzantine Empire and the Crusader states.
Okay.
Okay.
So now we know.
So he was in charge of the Turcopoles. Good to know.
All right.
I know, it's very sad. I mean, this poor guy, like he's, working hard. It's not his fault, but like the Turks didn't kill him. It was the Knights because they insisted on this big, heavy man wearing this super hot armor on a super hot day, and he just died of heat stroke. And I feel like there's this kind of recurring theme with the Knights of this kind of pointless futility in what they're doing, especially in the next section when we find out afterward that all this thing did was send the Turks away to go kill other people instead.
Yep.
Yeah, and I sort of wonder, like, it's like they're this group of men whose initial reason for being was to defend Jerusalem, against all coming, infidel forces or whatever. And they lost Jerusalem, like 200 years before this or something. And so, or 100 years, I don't know, a while ago, before a couple generations before this story, they lost Jerusalem and had to leave the city. And it's like they're clinging to this glory of the past that isn't now they're just on this little rock in the middle of the ocean. Like they're no longer defending like the seat of Christendom, you know, or the birthplace of Christendom, or however they phrase it. I can't remember, but
No, I mean, they're defending Tripoli, which is a place where, like, I mean, I don't know all the history, but you can pretty much read it as Europeans went and took over this place in North Africa. And it's like, maybe you shouldn't have taken a place in North Africa. It's not in Europe.
Yeah, maybe you're it's this overextension, and then they're trying to defend the overextension, and they're gonna fail.
Yeah, and it's pointless. And just like, don't do it. How about you just don't, like, you know, attack other places and take them over? Imperialism is kind of stupid.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's the theme for the book. Imperialism is kind of stupid.
Kind of. So Sinan Pasha and Dragut come ashore to sort of survey the area, and they're actually really impressed by the fortification of San Angelo. And they decide, well, we're not going to waste any more time here. Let's move on down the road. And they sort of turn their eyes to Medina instead. And they're going to sack and pillage that village instead of trying to fight over Burgu.
Yeah.
The ultimate goal is Tripoli, though. Like, they know that is their ultimate goal, and they need to take Tripoli, but this is just sort of things along the way that they can do to sort of.
Yeah, and the Sultan, I find it interesting, like the Sultan was so clear about, you know, you can do this, but you can't risk Tripoli, and so don't do anything that would risk Tripoli. And clearly they want to attack Malta, and they want to attack Gozo, particularly because of the governor there. But it's kind of like, are they going to, or are they not going to?
Yeah. Well, I think it certainly for us as readers, it creates tension because we know we know how weak the knights are, but they don't know. And so the knights know that if the Turks really tried, they could totally wipe them out, but the Turks don't know that. So then there's this ambiguity of like, how far are they going to push it?
Yeah. Hey.
All right, next section.
Yeah. So we know that the attack is going to be on Medina, and Juan de Homedes wants to send absolutely no support at all.
Oh.
Another prime example of why he's such a wonderful leader. 300 people have tried to escape Medina, but we find out that none of them actually do, because they are almost all immediately taken prisoner or killed by the Turks. They do send someone, the Medina does send someone to talk to Juan de Homedes, and they ask for at least de Villegagnon to come and help, who agrees to it. So he is only going to send one, but Gabriel speaks up and saying, you're sending this man to his death. So in just a tiny little bit, Juan de Homedes rescinds his offer of sending one and decides to send 6 along with de Villegagnon.
But he's basically just getting rid of his rival.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah. He's just like, oh, you can go and die.
Yeah, and he's sending them to die and be blamed for their own deaths.
Yeah.
And of those 7 people, Jarrett Blythe, Lymond, and Gabriel and de Villegagnon are 4 of them. And I don't think we ever find out who the other 3 are. I don't think they're important characters. So
they're French knights.
Yes.
Yeah,
and the one French knight that was going to go was sort of replaced by Gabriel, who decided that, no, I'm going to go in his stead. You'll stay here.
So we have a bunch of interesting questions, including why does Jarrett go, why does Gabriel go, and why does Lymon go? Any guesses?
This is where the thing that I mentioned at the beginning of the chapter, where it's like, I'm very confused by some character motivations. This is one of them. Like, this seems to be certain death. Like, yes, they pull it out in the end, but it seems like they have no expectation of pulling it out. Like, it seems certain, like, they're going to die. And I was having trouble finding, like, it feels like they're just like this group of people is condemned to death, and so we are going to sacrifice ourselves and go and offer them a little hope and comfort and leadership as we all die together. Like, and it, I mean, I couldn't see much beyond that in terms of what they were doing. So,
well, so I guess we'll get more into it in the next chapter where we spend a lot of it with them there, but certainly there's a hint that Gabriel is hoping for a miracle or that he can save somehow save the city. Jarrett is probably there because he worships Gabriel.
Right.
And why is Lymon there?
Yeah. I mean, so this at the bottom of 127 is actually where I started tearing up when Gabriel he gives this prayer. And I just to read it, because I thought it was really beautiful. He says, Almighty God, preserve these your children who go with no thought of self to succor the weak in their hour of desperate need. We pray for this order, that what we do may diminish none of its glory, and what we leave undone may be forgiven, and it and us. Guide us, and when we have gone, guide those who remain, who do what they do, O Lord, for most piteous love of thee and thy Son. Into thy hands we commend our spirits, and under thy foot we lay joyfully our mortal flesh. And I just like, maybe he's completely insecure and insincere and totally evil. But if he's not, like, if this is genuine, like, that's incredibly moving, that we go knowing we'll die, and maybe he's hoping for a miracle, but miracles don't fall out of the sky. So yeah, I don't know.
It's very brave. I will also note in this section another reference to the similarity between the two of them. They're both mounted, both capped in the moonlight with identical silvery hair. One was Francis Crawford, the other was Gabriel himself. Mm-hmm. Again, these like parallel images of the two of them, the holy one and the unholy one.
Yeah.
Do you know how old Graham Reed Mallet is?
He said he was in his 30s at some point.
I feel like it said he was in his like mid to late 30s.
Yeah, at some point it said something about him being in his 30s. Jeez. Maybe when they were talking about how old Jolita was. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it's mid to late 30s. All right, the Rape of Galatian.
Yes, chapter 4. So, get my notes for that. So, like I said, Gabriel has taken the French knight's place. It's interesting to note he's not wearing armor now, where he was wearing armor before.
Maybe he learned from the whole Nick Upton thing.
Jarrett Blythe questions if Gabriel came because Lymond came. And we jump to the governor of Medina, whose name escapes me at the moment. Adorn, I think. Yes. And Adorn sees the sort of fire in the ditch, and they sort of lower a rope so that all the 7 knights can climb up. And there's this moment where Gabriel sort of lies to him and says there's a bigger army coming, and then the governor slowly realizes that that's not true. But they make the rest of the city believe that it is true to keep them hopeful, and also to make the Turks outside think that, well, there's another army coming. We can't really spend too much time here. Mm-hmm. So it's just another sort of ruse to misinform the enemy.
So why do you think, so Jarrett thinks that Gabriel came because Lymon came. But it seems like Gabriel decided to come first. Like, he initially said he was going to come with Nicholas when Nicholas was talking to the Grand Master, and Gabriel was like, I'll go with you. I can't remember if Jarrett was there at that point or not, but it's like illumination struck him. He has this moment of like, oh, that's why he came. It's for Lymon and the religion that Gabriel came to Medina. And I'm just kind of like, why does he think that? Is it just part of his hero worship of Gabriel? And
Well, he sees over and over Gabriel has all this concern for Lymond, and he's helping him on his horse, and he's like wanting to protect him. And so Gabriel is a natural mentor. He's been a mentor for Jarrett. Jarrett looks up to him. He sees that Gabriel has decided to adopt this stray who, in Jarrett's mind, doesn't deserve it. And now Jarrett is afraid that this great man, Gabriel, is going to put himself in danger to protect this awful Lymond who doesn't deserve Gabriel's affection, but because Gabriel is so good, Gabriel is giving it anyway.
Yeah. So, and I mean, Jarrett, I'm guessing there's some pretty intense jealousy going on here too. Like, he's being replaced.
I feel like the subtext is almost text in terms of like reading the character's motivations. Like Jarrett is very jealous of Gabriel's attention to Lymond, for sure.
Yeah.
And it even says basically that he came for reasons that had little to do with the Turk. He's there because Gabriel's there.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, Jarrett's thoughts about Lymon, where he said he came from he had appointed himself unasked to the tiny squadron from a spoiled child's relish for gambling. So it's like he thinks the reason Lymon comes on this is because he just enjoys gambling, and so it's a childish decision, and he's unasked. Like, it's almost implies like he's unwanted in this group, which of course isn't true because he's actually quite competent, and
yeah,
other people can see it. So yeah,
but Jarrett's not so fond of him, and I think he's looking for reasons to dislike him, similarly as how he was looking for reasons to dislike Oona.
Yeah. I feel like Gabriel has replaced his dead fiance. Like, his Elizabeth was his reason for being and everything, and now Gabriel is his reason for being. And
Jarrett has a tendency to put people on pedestals.
Yeah.
Jarrett really cracks me up. He's a funny character.
Oh.
I mean, I don't know. You could say he's a tragic character, but I find it hilarious because he's so hot-headed.
He's one of those characters I enjoy reading, but I really don't want to know in real life. Like, he would drive me crazy.
Yeah, at least like Lymon would drive you crazy, but it would be really good conversation, and you'd have a lot of fun too.
It would be interesting, crazy.
Yeah. There's also, I think they're talking about miracles, and Lymon asks, "What miracle is the Grand Master praying for? Do you suppose?" Which I assume is he's referring to the fact that the best thing for the Grand Master would be for them to all die.
Yeah.
Next section.
So the defenses are sort of raised as best that they could be. Lymond is reusing the sheep trick. He's gonna have everybody in Medina sort of dress like a soldier, and I like how they stole sort of the wooden cannon idea from Thompson that they learned of, and like they're making all of these weapons and defenses out of basically wood and dirt and clay. They raise an interior wall inside of the wall that's already there, and like they built this ditch. So just really raising all of these defenses for the city. There's an interesting part I didn't quite understand where Gabriel and Lymond talk about is it a church that's in Medina and the people that live there? Well, what are they called? Sorry.
Yeah, they don't want to tear it down for rubble to add to the defenses.
Okay.
Right.
The Augustinian monks.
The Augustinian monks. Yeah, they don't want to sacrifice their church.
And so Lymond goes to get Gabriel because he thinks Gabriel's the only one that could convince him it's necessary for the greater good.
Right. Yeah, and Gabriel's kind of like, don't mock us. And I didn't think Lymond was. I thought he was being serious. Like, the monks don't want to give up their church and we need the stone. Can you please go convince them that God is okay with it?
Well, this is one of the most interesting exchanges, actually, because Lymond comes to Gabriel and asks him to help, but he does it in this way that is a little bit mocking. He says, "I believe that some of your inimitable eloquence would be balm on the Western escarpment." Anyway. So he's kind of playing up the inimitable eloquence, kind of like, LOL, you're so eloquent. And then he says, I fear that only someone on the most intimate terms with the deity will answer. So again, he's kind of making fun of this Gabriel is so holy thing. And that's where Gabriel says, I wish you did not need to mock. And he agrees. He says, then I shall go, since that is what you would expect me to say, meaning like you would expect me to take credit for being on intimate terms with God. But he smiles this sweet smile. And after asking, saying he wishes he didn't need to mock, he says, for of all men, my God could love you, and I too. So either he's really holy and he wants Lymon his religion, or he's trying to seduce him. Come on.
Well, and I do think like Lymon is being a little bit sarcastic in this moment, but I also think he's being totally serious. Like the only way these monks are going to give up their church is if they think that a man of God is saying, hey, God wants you to do this. And they're not going to believe Lymon. Like,
yeah, totally.
He's an unconvincing messenger in this situation. And he really does need Gabriel to go with all of his reputation and everything to go and be like, hey, give us the stone in your church. So he's being sarcastic, but he's also being serious. And maybe Gabriel is sort of sees that as well. Like maybe he's just replying with a little bit of in the same tone, kind of a little bit of mocking too. But yeah, I agree. I think that our only choices are that either he's genuine and sincere, or he's kind of like Machiavellian and has some sort of agenda that we don't know and is trying to seduce Lymon into something else, which...
Well, he could be even trying to seduce him into the church, They're not all perfect.
Yeah. I guess so. It just seems like an odd way to convert someone into Christianity.
I mean, it's quite an interesting line. For of all men, my God could love you, and I too. Yeah. And that's like this profession of love. And then this is where Jared is so jealous and like, why is Gabriel like this guy so much? He's not worth it. And maybe Jared's right. Maybe Lymon is just being a dick and Gabriel, is better than him. And maybe this is humility that Lymon needs to learn.
When did Jared's sort of temper towards Lymon change? Because in the beginning, I thought they were sort of close friends and really cared for each other. And I don't know if I ever really
super excited to see him, right? Back in wherever they were.
I think as soon as Lymon started making snide comments against his hero Gabriel, his opinion of Lymon started to drop. And then as soon as Gabriel started professing love, his jealousy began to grow.
Yeah. I guess
I think it wasn't until they landed in Malta, because in Messina he was like, Francis Crawford, Yeah,
he was like, he had this, Lymon was his like newfound enigma, and the only disappointment was that Lymon doesn't want to join the Knights and isn't into the religion. So he was already like a little disillusioned, but he was fine with him up until they got to Malta. And
I actually really like Jared Wyatt as a character, and I really hope he gets over that at some point. So we'll see.
I'll also just note again, the way the section ends is, then place your faith, said Graham Mallet, in the 8-pointed cross, and again spoke to Lymond alone. Lymond is the one, like he really wants to convert Lymond and win Lymon's loyalty.
It is interesting though, and I think this might be a little bit of an insight into Gabriel's character, maybe, is that that's what he says. He says, place your faith in the 8-pointed cross, which is not God. Like that is a really interesting distinction where he's like, place your faith in the Knights of St. John, which is what the 8-pointed cross represents. He does not say place your faith in Christ or place your faith in God or anything like that. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the Knights have their vows, which ultimately are to God. So it's, I guess, by proxy, it goes up to God in the end. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think he's saying, like, the Knights are going to be the intervening force here. So,
I mean, he definitely has a high degree of respect for the Knights, right? Because when the other French were like, hey, you should lead us, he's like, no, we have to follow the correct rules.
Yeah. Or there in that speech, he said something about how there's nothing material to be gained by rebellion. There's only things to be lost. And so I wonder if at another point in time they had suggested the same thing, if he would have jumped at the chance to lead the knights. But at that moment, it's like, no, if we rebel, there's nothing to be gained here, and then he goes on to explain why. But I'm not sure he completely said, like, I don't want the job. So, yeah. Anyway.
Should we move on to the next section?
Sure. So this next section is a long one and a lot happens. So I'm just going to quick summarize it and then we can go back. So the Turks are pulling the cannons over the land to get closer to Medina. Lymond challenges Gabriel about his intentions for coming. And he says that Medina is going to fall anyway, so why did you bother coming? We find out the Turks have sort of done horrible things to the people that tried to escape. They've like crucified and beheaded them. So of course Gabriel wants to exterminate all the Muslims, and Lymon has a much more humanitarian approach to it, which leads to a sort of confrontation between them, where it ends up, I think Jarrett Blythe is the one that tries to slap.
Mm-hmm. He does.
I was a little confused as to which one it was, but Jarrett tries to slap Lymon for his rudeness, and at that sort of instant, that's when Dragut comes out and starts the attack of arrows and cannons. During the bombardment, Gabriel disappears, and he is trying to escape the city by rope. Lymon catches up to him, and they sort of grapple on the rope, and both fall. And we learn that Gabriel had intended to get caught by the Turks so they could torture him, and he would tell them that a much larger army is coming. Lymon says, well, that was stupid, because don't you think that they would have continued to torture you and find out you were lying? So we see that Gabriel is trying to make himself the martyr and sacrifice himself the better good here, although I think there may be other motivations behind it. And then the Turks abandon their siege. Why? Seemed rather sudden. And there's some sort of plan that really confused me about Sicily and a message that was sent from Sicily. So I read
from way back at the beginning of the book.
Yeah, that's from the beginning of the book. So when they were in Sicily, when they were in Messina at the beginning, they came up with this plan, like over drinks, where they would send messages that Charles's armies were coming to chase away the Turks, even though they knew that wasn't really going to happen, because they thought the Turks might believe it if they intercepted it. So that's one of those messages that they'd set up to be sent, fake message, that the Turks intercepted and believed. This is from history. This really happened.
I forgot all about that.
Really?
Okay, cool. So that was my quick sort of bullet point breakdown of what happened in this bit.
There's so much interesting stuff. I don't even know where to start.
So many interesting things. Where do you want to start?
All right. Well, okay. So let's start with Jarrett, of course, is very, very angry, and he bursts in through the silence and blah, blah, blah about how dare, the armies of Spain and France and the Low Countries not be here fighting with us. We're saving their spoiled asses, basically. And Lymond then says, is that why you came to Medina, Sir Graham? And Gabriel, that's where he says, I came to help force from the earth, foul body and black soul, the heathen hordes you see here. And then they have this really interesting exchange where Lymon basically says that, ultimately ends up basically saying that the Turks are not that bad. And he says, worse happened at home. They're talking about the terrible crimes the Turks are committing. And then Lymon counters it with, worse happened at home. Buklou and his friends played football, as I remember, with his English prisoners' skulls. So saying the Turks are not this abomination that's so much worse than the Europeans. Everybody is doing terrible things, and your sort of claiming of superiority rings false. But Gabriel is not having it. Gabriel calls the Turks vermin. And then Lymon argues and says rats don't pray, meaning, and cowardice doesn't commend itself to Turks, meaning they're brave, they pray, they believe what they're doing just as much as you believe what you're doing. So I feel like this is a really interesting argument, which again comes down to Lymond being very tolerant and modern in his thinking, and Gabriel being like, I mean, whatever else we think about this guy being holy, he hates the Turks, and all this stuff about them being vermin is like actually horrible. Although probably, perfectly common belief at the time in a place like that.
And I mean, I like how Lyman tries to bring it back in his face by saying, like, doesn't your very order shoot live captives out of cannons? Like, you talk about how it's horrible that they beheaded and crucified these prisoners, which it is horrible, but like, you guys are doing bad things also. It's not just them. Like, everybody.
And
yeah, like Lymon isn't excusing the Turks. He's not saying they're saintly or anything. He's just saying they're no different than us, which is true. Like, they're just saying they're humans and we're humans, and humanity is kind of horrible in general in these situations. And yeah, it just, but that, so it's that whole bit about it was true, no one spoke. And so clearly his example hits home.
Yeah.
Like, oh, yeah.
Well, and then Gabriel is shamed. He apologizes. He says, "Forgive me, I have lost you and my integrity both. You are right, I have betrayed the order." Meaning like he's thrown away his life and he shouldn't have done that, because he owes it to the knights not to just die. He's basically saying his reason for coming, kind of answering Lyman's question that kicked off this exchange. He says, "It's hard to take the safe, the sane, the old man's path. I hoped it is not always wise to hope for a miracle." And then Lyman's response just super, super cracks me up. Who doesn't? But in miracles, as in hell, there is no order of rule. I recommend that as Medina is watching us, we all look enthusiastic about fighting instead. Handkerchief, Sir Graham? And that's when Jared tries to hit him.
Yeah, and so then Jared like hauls off and tries to slap him when it seems totally unjustified. Like, Lyman's just kind of like, okay, we got to snap out of it. Like,
Lyman is a giant dick. Handkerchiefs are good. Like, Gabriel is crying. He's shamed. This great hero is like in tears. And Lyman is totally mocking him. There is no explanation for handkerchiefs, Sir Graham, except mockery. And it's hilarious. It makes me laugh every time I read it.
Yeah, but there's also an element, I totally agree, by the way, he is mocking him, but there's also an element of they're under this intense pressure. They have to snap out of it and get back to work, and they can't sit around moaning about like, oh, I've, vanity, all is vanity, which is kind of what Gabriel's doing. So Lymon, yes, he's mocking him, but he's also like, all right, suck it up. We got to move on. And Jared it's just funny because of all the people who need to be defended, Graham is not one of them. Like, he does not need Jarrett to come in and like defend his honor or whatever. And
oh, totally. And then and then it doesn't even work. Like, Lyman totally catches him.
Yeah.
And he says, if your godly offices stretch to praying as well as posturing, you better start reciting. Meaning, he's calling Jared on his posturing, just like he called, Graham on his focusing on his, whatever, ego instead of saving everybody, fighting.
And then it's Lymond. So it says, and the call to arms rang out. So Drago has come. The call to arms rang out, and from they get together. Francis Crawford rallied his knights. Come, comrades, come, brethren, and pray. Let us. So it's not Graham. It's not Nicholas. It's Lymond who's like, get it together. Like, he's the one who gets everyone rallied to meet this challenge. And yeah.
Well, and we see that he's willing to use the rhetoric to, for the greater good as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The contempt for death, which alone can render us invincible. Okay.
So then, shortly after that, leading to the scene over the wall, we have de Villiganyan comes up and asks Lymon, "Where is Gabriel?" And Lymon says in an unexpected voice always is a hint for us, "I thought he was with you." And then he puts down his bow and goes running to find Gabriel. Why?
Well, I think he figures out that what Gabriel's doing, because he finds him almost immediately. Like, he knows where he's going. So I think that whole bit about I vaingloriously thrown away my life, you know, and how Gabriel was like, this was worthless. So now he's going to try and not throw away his life in this empty gesture. He's going to try and make a gesture, and Lymon figures out what it is and goes after him.
So then what do you make of that scene where they're fighting over the edge and they both fall?
I mean, Gabriel wants to sacrifice himself in this highly dramatic fashion. That's going to fail. It's doomed to fail. Lymon knows it's doomed to fail. It's not going to work. Like, if he gets tortured, he's going to break, as everyone does. You can't withstand torture. And Lymon's trying to stop him, like, successfully. So.
Gabriel kind of grabs him and pulls him down with him. Is that just the heat of the moment? It's a pretty intense moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fight scene. Like, they're both competent fighters. And so, like, if you look at it, Lymon, but he has this whole, like, "Are you sent me," said Sir Graham Mallet, Grand Knight of Knight Grand Cross of the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, by God or the devil. He made no effort now to rise. So, like, Lymon has thwarted his plan, and he's like, "Are you here from God or are you here from the devil?" Which is a pretty dramatic, I don't know.
138, yeah.
So then on 140, the ending of this, the last paragraph, so Lymon finds this piece of paper that Gabriel dropped, that Gabriel doesn't know Lymon found. And it says that, this Turkish siege is untenable, and it's basically another ploy to get them to leave, to think that someone's coming to, fight them. It says in the last paragraph, "The lies looked convincing. The Turkish side was more forcible still. Yet, aware now of Gabriel's caliber, Francis Crawford could not bring himself yet to acknowledge it, or his own malicious intent. The paper was crushed in his tunic. Gabriel, he hoped, would assume it lost in the fall. Something in Latin, 'Give me chastity and continence,' said Francis Crawford between his teeth, looking down at the grand cross of grace at his feet, but pray God, not just yet." What do you make of that?
I was confused by this. I couldn't follow what was happening. So, but I did read this part rather quickly. So,
well, here was my question. Okay, so it says, so there's this note. Part of it's in English, so obviously readable. The Turkish siege was, one side was written in Turkish, the other in English. We don't know what it says, the note. Like, that was my question. What does the note say? And why so Francis Crawford, which we've said before, like, when she calls him Francis Crawford, like, we get this sense of who Lymon, it's a closer sense of who he really is when we refer to him as Francis Crawford. So, aware of Gabriel's caliber. So is that referring to this note that he found, or is it referring to the fact that he was going to sacrifice himself in this vain attempt to try and turn the tide of this battle? And then he couldn't, I think from the sentence, it's that his caliber is good, because he says Francis Crawford could not bring himself yet to acknowledge it, or his own malicious intent. Or is there something in the note that's bad and he doesn't want to acknowledge it? And how is he being malicious?
Well,
I don't know.
one side is written in Turkish and the other is English. Is it a message from the Turkish that they sent to Gabriel somehow?
I thought it was supposed to be something that Gabriel thought he was going to get like, he's going to get captured, and he was going to have this note on him that somehow implied, like, there's this huge army coming or something like that. But one of my questions is that Lymon might read Turkish? Like, does the Turkish part say something different than the English part? Because I don't know.
So
I have no idea. These are my questions. I have no idea.
we're told what the English side says. The English side
Right.
says the siege is untenable, help is on the way for the knights, and if they wish to survive, the Turkish army must fly. So that's what the English side says, and it totally aligns with Gabriel's story that he's going to say that, and that he's basically trying to save everybody in Medina. Then all we're told about the Turkish side was more forcible still. Does that mean it's more forcible in planting a lie for the Turks to believe that help is on the way?
Yeah, I don't know. And is it's not unreasonable to assume that Lymon can read Turkish. Like, if he spent a lot of time with Turkish prisoners, we know language, he has a talent for languages. Like, it's not unreasonable to assume that he can do that. So I don't know.
I think also, like, the really interesting in this is Francis Crawford could not bring himself yet to acknowledge Gabriel's caliber,
right,
and his own malicious intent.
Right.
So why can't he bring himself to acknowledge these things, and why does he have malicious intent?
Right. These are the questions. I do not know. Because I think it falls into the caliber that he's discovered. Like, is Gabriel's caliber, is it this good, solid, honorable, upstanding caliber of someone who would sacrifice themselves in a like slim chance of saving this town? Or did Lymon discover something else about Gabriel in this note or in some other thing, and he discovers that his caliber is bad in some way?
Yeah.
So those are the two options there. And then his malicious intent, is he like self-reflective in this moment and he doesn't want to acknowledge that he's got some sort of selfish motivation for something? Or is he genuinely like bad? Like, he's got some sort of like slightly evil intention, like he's going to betray the knights and convince them to come to Scotland under false pretenses or something. I don't know.
Well, I think we do get this idea that Lymond, he keeps making these kind of petty, nasty comments, the handkerchief one, most recently. Maybe he just, is shamed by Gabriel being a better person than him, and maybe he's jealous and bitter, and maybe his like malice is his own insecurity and negativity coming out against Gabriel.
And he just doesn't want to admit that he's being a small, petty person.
Yeah, and he doesn't want to admit it to himself.
Content.
Totally possible.
Or it could be the opposite, or it could be that, but I guess the question then for the opposite is, okay, if he's discovered something bad about Gabriel, why doesn't he want to acknowledge his malicious intent toward him then?
Yeah.
Weird.
Yeah. I don't know.
We'll find out, I'm sure.
I promise it'll make sense by the end of the book.
That's good. I mean, I'm enjoying it. It's I feel like, and I said this before, I think the last time, it's like my entire perception of Gabriel is swinging from ultra shady to not shady at all. And like every interaction we have with him, I'm like, oh, that's definitely not shady. Like he's a good, honorable guy. And then like in the next page, it'll do something like, that is super shady. What is going on? So I'm enjoying that.
Definitely. All right, should we move on to the next bit?
So since the Turks are leaving Medina, we know that they will now set their eyes on Gozo. So we jump back to Oona, who's watching the Turks invade Rabat, which is sort of the city that the governor's palace is in. Oona has been fighting her hardest to defend and lead the Gozans, I don't know how to say it, in Galatian's stead, because he is completely inefficient.
A rat bastard.
There's an English guy named Luke who's firing cannons back, but unfortunately the tower that he's in sort of gets obliterated. There's this other guy named Bernardo de Fonte who has given his life to the battle, but we also find out that he killed his whole family before because he didn't want them to suffer whatever the Turks are going to do.
It was her maid, right? Maria was the woman who was helping her, and it was her husband. Yeah.
So then Maria's sister tries to help her escape by taking her to a tunnel, but she sort of leaves the tunnel and finds Galatian, and there's this whole bit where Galatian and the Turks are trying to negotiate about like who can be saved, and they end up saying, well, 40 of your greatest men we will leave, but you need to surrender yourself immediately. And of course he doesn't, but Oona does it for him. When she finds him, she calls out to the Turks and say, hey, he's over here, get him. So they they capture him and Oona. Oona is untouched and they let her keep her clothes on, but they do some pretty awful things to Galatian, which I didn't really mind because he's a terrible person. And she's taken prisoner by Dragut. And we find out that the Gozoans did not fare well at all. 300 lived by escaping, 1,000 died, and 6,300 men, women, and children of Gozo were put aboard the Ottoman fleet to be sold at best to slavery. Not a good day for Gozo at all.
Yeah. I didn't really do it. This all really happened.
It all really happened, and pretty much everyone aside from Oona is like they're genuine historical characters.
I didn't really comment too much on this section just because it was a good section to read it, and it's such a tragic like fate of all these people, except for the one part where Oona is about to escape. So she's literally on the edge of escaping with these 300 people who get away. And it says, she found herself staring at a moving shadow in the steep lane below, a shadow which hid other shadows, which hesitated, shrank, and waited, trapped in a distant doorway. So he's hiding from the Janissaries. And so then it says, the struggle between her pride and her will was infinitesimal. Oona O'Dwyer was a brave woman and had in her time been a great one. Noiselessly, without a glance at the woman who had brought her there, so near freedom and life, without a word to the others, the lucky ones who were on their way to escape, the Irish woman slipped from the doorway and with agonizing care to avoid disclosing her refuge, made her way from court, etc. So she goes to him. So my question was, the thing that keeps her from escaping is the governor below, that she sees him below in the street. And he's going to get captured. Like he's not going to be successful. Okay. And I think she knows that. Like I'm not sure that she leaves to betray him to the Turks. But my question was, I wondered if she left because she was afraid that he was lingering right below where they were escaping. And my thought was, she left because he could possibly bring attention to the people escaping. And so she left to save them and to draw him. Like she leaves in this way so that people can't get traced back to this door. And then she gets him and she, draws the attention of the Turks to him, so he gets captured and stuff. I don't know. Was it with like a revenge motivation, or was it a save the people escaping motivation, or was it a combination of both? And like, what was this struggle, this infinitesimal struggle between her pride and her will?
I have an opinion. Philippe, do you have an opinion?
Well, I thought that she was just stopping him from escaping. I think because he was in the street below, he knew about the tunnel. He was on his way there.
Yeah.
And he couldn't call him out when he was in the building because it would give away everybody else. So I think she was like, there's no way this man can, like the things that he's done and how horrible he was to the people of Gozo, like this is the main reason that Gozo is in this predicament. So she just had to go out and not betray him, because he's not even worthy of being betrayed. Like he's a horrible person, but that's the way I read it. Like her pride was, she had to take care of the situation. She couldn't just let it be.
Yeah, I think he was actually about to escape because it says on his way to cowardly freedom. So I think her whole motivation was like she could get away, but he would probably also get away. And she just couldn't stand the thought of him getting away. So she sacrificed herself so that he would be punished, which is
Yeah.
a very Una thing to do. It's very her personality. It's fatalistic and it's vengeful and it's justice. And it's really sad because she could have gotten away if she just let him get away too.
Yeah. Mm.
I thought there was
Yeah,
also
he
go ahead.
clearly knew about the passage because
Yeah.
he tells her about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And she just couldn't stand that thought of him, you know, after causing 6,000 however many people to get kidnapped into slavery, he can't be allowed to escape. I was just really impressed with this description of she who had been the swiftest rider in Ireland, the quickest wit, the most icy in vengeance, and basically it's describing her kind of scurrying from door to door and hiding, having to hide from this attack. So she's gone from this very powerful, capable person to, you know, having to hide in the shadows just to barely maybe escape. And it's just, you know, really sad. I just feel so bad for her. She doesn't deserve to be in this terrible situation.
Yeah.
But I think also like there's definitely this malevolent, vengeful side of her that even uses the word malevolent against her earlier or about her earlier. If she was just a little less vengeful, she would have been fine. She would have gotten away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh no.
Oh, but also that she was the one that put the women and children in the boat to get them away.
That was so sad.
Fury that she felt when they got sent back.
The Grandmaster.
Knights are so horrible.
Banished knights. Seriously.
And then at the end of this, I think there's also an interesting bit. It talks about her coming all enchanted from France to Calypso's Isle. So maybe it's not her that is Calypso. Maybe she too is a victim of Calypso being enchanted to Gozo, and then, you know, nothing good happens. And then this is referring to a gravestone, and it's this beautiful quote about, you know, from the person who's dead, asking about, you know, on my couch and in my abode there is naught but tears, and what will happen when my creator comes to me. It's all this stuff. So when I was in Gozo, I went to the Citadel. I'll show you pictures later. And this is in the museum. It's a 10th century, 11th century gravestone of a little girl, like a 10-year-old, I think, Arab girl. And the gravestone is there, and then it's translated, and this is the text of it.
Oh.
Wow.
So I guess Dunnett went to the Citadel of Gozo and also went to the museum in the Citadel and looked at the gravestone and wrote down the translation and put it in her book.
Wow. That's awesome. And then we get this scene where Jarrett hits Lymon with a rock.
Yep.
Of course he does. Jarrett.
Lymon was trying to get to Gozo to save Oona and sort of was in the water pushing the boat out when Jarrett caught up with him and threw a rock at the back of his head.
Also, this horrified disbelief of Jarrett that Gabriel would go after Lymon. He's just like, oh, you know, not by you. What are we, nursemaids?
Right. So that's why Jarrett goes after him, because God forbid anything bad happens to Gabriel.
Oh my gosh. Oy.
But he's very callous. It talks about him throwing this rock and not caring how hard it hits.
Yeah.
And then he's so vicious toward Lymond. He says, Gabriel may see a soul worth redeeming, where I may see only trash.
Yeah.
Damn, Jarrett.
And like at the end of it, yeah, trash.
This was your
at
friend.
the end of the chapter, he says like he was the first soul Gabriel had called to them, who resisting had hit back, and hitting back had struck so sorely home. So it seems like in Jarrett's mind, that's the justification for his anger. Like that's why he's angry, because Lymon is resisting Gabriel's call to the knights or whatever. But I am suspicious that is the whole reason. Like, Jared is just massively jealous. And
well, it could be both, right? Like, how dare someone not respect that Gabriel's putting in all this effort? This great man is reaching out to you and you're spitting in his face.
like, yeah, I agree. Yeah, it could be that. But I think Jared's just trying to like justify to himself, like, I'm so angry because of this. When really, it's more that.
Yeah. And then, I mean, also, I think Lymond makes a really, really good point, which is the thing that strikes home with Jarrett. He says, even whores have souls. How bloody offended you'd be if I asked you how you'd feel if Elizabeth were there and I had stopped you from reaching her. So, like, how dare Jarrett stop Lymond from saving Oona when Jarrett's whole motivation for being a knight is because a woman that he was going to marry died? Like, how dare he stop Lymond from rescuing a woman that he cares about?
Yeah, and it's such this whole, like, even whores have souls. Like, this is such a part of Christianity in a deep, deep way, because prostitutes are part of the story of Christ. And like that there are multiple times in the New Testament where Jesus interacts with prostitutes in a very graceful, like gracious and kind and forgiving manner. And yet these men throughout the history of Christendom, like throughout Christian history, men respond horribly to prostitutes or to women that they think are in sexual sin. Like somehow that is this ultimate, betrayal of purity or whatever. And Lymond is just like, what is wrong with you? Because Jared's been doing this since he first heard it, first mentioned Oona to him. So, yeah.
So what do you guys think this is leading us toward? This triangle between the three of them and the malicious intent?
Nothing good.
I just don't know yet.
I don't know.
Graham Reed Mallett's intentions or motivations.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I think it all hinges on Graham's. Yeah, like you said, Philippe. Like, who is he? Is he an honorable man who's slightly arrogant and caught up in his order? Is he a deeply flawed man who has issues? Or is he, malicious and evil and scheming? And I don't feel like any of those are off the table.
Yeah.
At this point.
So I remember when I first read this, not being able to figure out the author's opinion of these things. She's got these debates about religion and these debates about, holy wars, and these debates about whether Lymond's irreverence is, terribly immature and, hurtful, and Gabriel's holiness, and like, should he be poking at that? And I just remember when I first read it being like, I have no idea what she thinks. She's presenting these different characters to me and they all have different opinions and I can't figure her out. And I didn't, I knew where I aligned, which is I'm totally with Lymond poking holes at these religious, sanctimonious, in my opinion, people. But I just remember being like, is Lymond going to be learning a lesson? And am I going to be like offended by this book that he learns a lesson about respecting religion? And I just had no idea at this point.
Yeah. Like, I will say, so from someone who takes religion seriously and does genuinely believe this stuff, like, to me, it makes Graham potentially such a more evil character if he is not, like, if he is using the language of faith to manipulate people around him or to gain power for himself. To me personally, that makes him such a more horrific character. That is, but if he is a flawed person who's trying to live up, if he's trying to, like, imperfectly live up to these words that he's speaking, which is something that happens a lot with people of faith. Like they talk about the things they believe and they don't live up to them, but they're trying. So like, if he's a character like that, then I have sympathy, but I don't feel like we know either way. And I'm leaning towards bad guy just because I want him to be a bad guy, because I think he would be super interesting as like as an antagonist to Lymon. I think this would be an interesting way to go, and so as a reader I want it to go that way. But yeah, I think he's more interesting if he's bad. But
What do you think, Philippe? You want to place bets at this point? Is Gabriel good or bad?
I don't necessarily know if good or bad is how we should be looking at him.
yeah,
I definitely think that he's going to end up being an antagonist to Lymond, but whether it's because he's evil, I'm not quite sure. I think it's just his opinions are different. Like two righteous good men can be enemies of each other because of their beliefs. It doesn't mean either one of them is good or bad. So
I want him to be evil.
well,
But yeah, I totally agree. He could be an antagonist without being, like, just because he has different goals could make him an antagonist. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
I still think he's at that level where he could either be that antagonist or he could end up being a really important teacher / mentor figure to Lymond. And it's possible that he could be both.
Mm-hmm.
Like Lymond could learn a lot of great lessons from an antagonist of his. So I don't know.
It could be that Lymond he could be, a learner who, like, Lymond digs at him, and there was that scene early in this section where he seems to learn, like he's like, I was vainglorious and my whatever, and starts crying and all that, and like maybe that was genuine and he's learning something from Lymond too. So yeah,
Maybe they'll meet in the middle and it'll be a transformation for both of them.
I think things between them will definitely get interesting once Jolita is back in the picture. So
yeah, that sort of random, like, hey, don't forget Jolita section was just so funny. Like, oh right, there's this whole group in Scotland.
It'd probably been a big wet. So
yeah.
All right, you guys want to see my pictures of Gozo?
Yes.
Let's go. So
also, my one last question I have is, have we lost Oona for the rest of the book? Like,
I mean, Lymond is definitely going to try to rescue her. Definitely.
Sure, but is he going to be able to get her back from the Turks? Like, that seems.
Well, he does have Turkish friends.
It's true, he does. Maybe he's going to go off on his own and try to rescue her.
I think we're going to see the Turks attack Tripoli as well. So.
The what?
I think the Turks are going to attack Tripoli in this book as well. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely seem to be headed that direction, but we're not in Tripoli. So are we going to go to Tripoli?
One of the main orders of the Knights Hospitaller is to defend Tripoli as well. So I think as much as he's going to hate doing it, I think Homedes is, by order of the Emperor, he's going to have to try and defend Tripoli. So
maybe.
Like, one of their main goals of being in Malta is like to defend Gozo, which they did a shit job of, and Tripoli. So
we'll see.
Right.
Okay, let's see photographs. Pictures.
Laura, how far is Gozo by boat from Malta?
Oh, not far. This is a little ferry. It's a ferry ride. And Malta has a great bus system, so I got around by buses. I took a bus to a ferry, took the ferry over to Gozo. This is the ferry, I guess. And that's Gozo.
You can see Gozo from Malta, right? It's not.
I think so. I can't remember. It's very close, though. It's not far. Yeah. And so then, like, that's the boat going there. And then this is when I was driving, I think. I was, like, in the bus. That's the Citadel up on the hill. And then where I went was, like, the other end of the island. So I stayed in this place. I just showing this picture because there's this Odyssey-themed restaurant in it. And we know Calypso is from the Odyssey. So they're definitely playing up the tourist thing of this place was in the Odyssey. And It's Calypso's Isle. This was my first night there. I just had this like drink and food at this bay, which is pretty. And then I walked around so you can see like some of the landscapes of Gozo. These are Roman salt pans. They date back to Roman times. There's a bunch of them. The food, which is, as you can see, pretty Italian. This was bruschetta. More of the rocky landscape. Thing about the salt pans dating back to Roman times. Salt, people gathering salt. I just thought this was really cool. This is some of the
Bring salt home from Gozo.
they were selling it by the side of the road and I didn't buy any, and I've always regretted this.
Yeah.
This some of the landscape. So they, like I said, it doesn't have beaches. It's just got these like rocky cliffs. So there's these like, this is like a pool rail, like in a swimming pool, only it goes down the cliff into the water. I went down a few of them. I think I went to down the one that's in this picture. Not the one I'm looking at, but like the one over there where that guy is. I think I climbed down that one and went in the water. A little scary. Yeah, you can see how steep it is.
Wow.
And then where I walked was to this like bay or inlet. I forget what it's called. It's like an inlet. It was beautiful, and you can swim way out, almost to the ocean, kind of through this. And you can see there was a dog, and so like me and the people and the dog like all swam around and chatted with each other. It was like so random. More landscape, and then okay, here's in the city. So I went to the city where this is where Oona is. Rabat, it's called, and the citadel is there. So you see the streetscape. And then there's a reference at one point to the little, like the saints on the walls. So I took a couple pictures of those. Here you see more of the city. There's a Maltese cross in this picture. So that's probably why I took it. This is the citadel. It was under this massive European reconstruction project at the time I was there. So there was a whole bunch of construction. There's a prison. And in the prison, there's graffiti drawn by the Knights of St. John who were kept in the prison. So this is a boat. There's a whole ton of these little prison graffiti of these boats going back to the time of the books. And you can see, I think you see a Maltese cross in the top right here. And there's more that show it even more clearly. These are Maltese crosses in the prison graffiti. This one just cracked me up because it's a prison cell and this very grumpy mannequin reminded me of Jarrett. Yeah, this was the time that Jarrett got thrown in the prison in Gozo for fighting. Okay, here I stopped to have a drink of wine and I was reading the book and I got to the scene where Oona is standing on the like the ramparts of the citadel looking out as the Turks swarm through the city and like go through the streets. And I was like, oh my God, I'm in the spot she's looking out. Like here I am looking out from the ramparts of the citadel of Gozo at the streets. And like the descriptions of the houses and stuff are the same. So I thought that was super, super cool. Like here I am exactly where she is.
Maybe that's exactly where Dorothy Dunnett was sitting.
Right? I mean, she totally was here.
Janet probably had wine at the same spot.
And then here's just more around the citadel. Then there's this thing about the soldier Bernardo, the one who killed his wife and daughters and then died fighting the enemy. This was a real guy. And there's this slab here that was on his house commemorating him. And then there's like a little map that shows you how to find the ruins of his house. So this all the stuff she put in here was true. This stuff really happened. More out from the citadel, you see there's like cannons still. These are obviously after the time of the books. Gunpowder magazines, right? It was a real citadel. And that's it.
Cool.
Oh, and then I have some fan art too. You want to see that?
Very, very cool.
I love the Mediterranean sort of like yellows and like clay and marble. It's really beautiful architecture.
Exactly. It was beautiful. It made me happy to be there. I really thought like, oh, I want to go back here someday because it's gorgeous. And then I have two pieces of fan art. First of all, Uncomfortable Jarrett by Striped Rose and Sketchpads. And I like the comment, I don't know if he's ever been comfortable in his life. And here's Gabriel and Lymond. And I just kind of enjoy the caption. I've only had Francis for a day and a half, but if anything happened to him, I'd kill everyone in this room and then myself.
Mother of God.
Okay. Any final?
Those are great.
Yeah. Any final questions, comments, predictions?
Sorry about the lawnmower outside my window. I tried to move.
Sorry about the construction outside of mine.
Sorry for not having any random background noise.
Well, thank you everyone for watching.
Yeah, looking forward to the rest of the book.
Oh,
Yeah, what happens?
we did our toast in the last video, but today officially is Dorothy Dunnett Day, correct?
It is, yes.
Yeah.
Go Dorothy Dunnett. Thank you for writing these amazing books. All right, bye everyone.